Hey folks, and welcome to another episode of Crit Hit Reviews with your host, Arlyeon. On today's episode, I'll be talking about Devspresso Games' Vambrace Cold Soul, which I received a review copy of. Let's talk about this turn-based dungeon crawling RPG and see if it's a cool experience, or one deserving of a chilly reception. Well, I'm definitely glad I start my reviews off with the story bits, because Vambrace has received a lot of patches affecting its gameplay over the last month or so, and changed a fair bit. And it might do so again by the time this review releases. It's currently at 1.09? That said, its story has remained consistent, so let's begin with that. You take the role of Avelia Lyric, an adventuress who finds herself directed to the frozen city of Icesnare, a once flourishing hub of civilization that's recently fallen on hard times. Though less of the times are tough, get a job kind, and more the civil war, cultists, and creepy rituals, and also ghosts galore having effectively driven the entirety of the place into a hellish freezing ruin, which is instantly closed off from the rest of the world, so also good luck in actually stumbling into this place. Also, good job to the main character for doing so. Honestly, I actually dug the story a fair bit, because there was a lot of effort towards fleshing out the lore of the world, as well as the city itself. Like, there's a lot of optional bits of story that you can immerse yourself in if you're the curious sort, and the overall quality of the writing isn't shabby. Like, I did go out of my way to do as many of the side quests as possible, just because they did provide more character interactions and made the overall experience a bit more rewarding. Heck, even without the quests, I just ended up wandering the hub city a lot to talk to NPCs and pick up collectible lore pages because I needed to know everything. Also, for those people who are curious, there is in fact multiple endings for you to explore. While I haven't reached my second ending yet, the overall path towards them seemed fairly straightforward, and my curiosity as to just how far-reaching some of the decisions are, especially after some rather tragic plot twists later on, is definitely the primary reason I'm continuing forward on a new save file. And I say primary because whilst I do find the game's story to be interesting, the gameplay still leaves a bit much to be desired. I will certainly give it credit for not being as bad as when it was initially released, but well, let's talk shop about what's currently there. To begin, Vambrace is a dungeon crawl. You gather a party of 4, with one of them being your fixed main character, and the others consisting of more generic characters whom you recruit in town. I mean, yes, you can technically recruit people in the dungeon, but it's a random event I've encountered 3 times as so far, so don't count on it. Avelia, our protagonist, starts out underwhelming, but gains points which allow you to tailor them to your tastes and make them a fairly formidable force compared to your generic companions, who, well, they just remain static, and the reason for that is that there's no leveling. I mean, yes, you will end up picking an abundant amount of fights, but your reward, other than not dying, is heaps of scrap for you to craft items with, and, you know, money to buy healing items. In effect, finding and or crafting relics and their improved variants is going to be the primary source of character advancement for you. So, expect to grind a fair amount, since actually getting the basic relic to do what you want is something you can only find vis-a-vis RNG, either by a lucky pickup or a lucky find at a merchant. What's more, advancing those relics doesn't take money, but rather area-specific drops. She'll end up frequently backtracking areas to farm materials so you can effectively advance. Which actually gets super insulting when you consider that if a character dies, you don't actually have a chance to retain their relic even if you win the fight. Nah, it's just gone forever, so if you get completely decimated in a boss fight, you can kiss all those hours spent making that item goodbye, and count on Myriad more to farm up a replacement. And yes, you can unequip items from a character if you're expecting to die, but who really expects to die unless you're on death's door? Also, this is a shame because the actual act of exploring the dungeons also feels like a pain. Whilst it does feel nicer than it did a few patches ago, the fact of the matter is the game's dungeon exploration is a weird combination of the above salvaging alongside resource management and survival, and the levels are lengthy, treks that encompass somewhere between 5 maps or so that you need to clear to reach a boss, each one of which feels a little long in the tooth and is packed with what feels like an abundance of obstacles. And by obstacles, I literally mean obstacles, since there's fucking traps every few steps, to the point that I felt it necessary to stack one of my character's trap detection to monstrous heights so it stopped crippling my team, effectively gear locking one of my characters and just forcing me to sit through an abundance of repetitive messages as I advanced. And yes, you can slightly fast forward through these things, like the traps and combat, by holding down shift, but it really doesn't fast forward it much, and it doesn't do much to help the fact that you move incredibly slow to boot while wandering down these hallways. And honestly, I really wish it was a toggle and not repeatedly holding down the shift key. Also, there's encounters, which end up feeling like a bit like the curios from Darkest Dungeons. You know, the objects that you'd interact with to potentially kick off finding loot or getting interesting buff or debuff. And they somewhat function similarly, albeit a bit more like a choose-your-own-adventure, except you don't choose to initiate them. They're forcibly just drag you into it, even if you've already determined that you'd really rather not mess with one and risk the chance of status effects. So, you just have to figure out if you have a character amongst your characters who is the best one at using the option, and hope the option you take isn't terrible. Because let me tell you, the status effects in this game are vicious, as they provide stat impairments and you actually can't get rid of them except at campsites. Really, you can't use any items except at campsites, which ends up feeling absolutely awful if you have an inventory full of healing potions and are a room or two away from a boss, but have no campsites available, and a companion that's on their last legs and might be poisoned or bleeding to add insult to injury. Oh, and those campsites? They aren't actually guaranteed heals. See, they're tied to the Overwatch stat, which essentially determines your chance of successfully camping to recover your health, as well as your vigor, which I guess is sort of like your do not die of cold/exhaustion stat, though there are some enemies that can directly attack it too, so hey, it's just like lower health that goes down in every room you walk through, and isn't targeted frequently, thankfully. Now, let's talk about the Overwatch stat for a second. See, unlike the trap stat, awareness, which is actually useful in combat, since it actually allows you to go before enemies if your awareness is higher, and is thus not terrible to have equipped, Overwatch is only useful when you're in camp, so actually having a relic that boosts it equipped during combat feels awful. But also, just having it sit in your inventory also takes up room, so that also feels awful, since you have limited inventory space. Also, insult to injury is that the Overwatch stat is also slightly broken, since it doesn't actually restore the amount it says you do when you critically heal. Which can actually end up feeling pretty punishing, given that the disorienting nature of the map means you'll sometimes end up confused as to where you are in it, and just end up pointlessly entering the wrong area and losing precious vigor, which, you know, if you lose all of it, well, either NPC buddy dies and falls on their precious relic, breaking it beneath their dead friggin' weight, or your main character passes out and sends you all the way back to the dungeon and into an infirmary. Because that's right, even if you have a boss on their last legs, if they are one hit from death, if your character happens to get targeted relentlessly and goes down, even with a party that's full up and ready to deliver the coup de grace, you get to start that long, sprawling dungeon from the start again. Still, at least the combat's improved over the course of like the last few patches. I won't say it's great, but players are now able to attack and defend and slowly build up charges towards pulling off a set of abilities as opposed to like one. I mean, it's still fairly limited to mostly just you attacking every turn at first without much in the way of options, which is less than ideal. But they're trying, I'll give them that, and there's 2 charge abilities. That's, it's an improvement. 100% more ability. And also, hey, the quests can also be pretty neat, not only because they give some pretty sweet loot at times, but also for the sake of some of the quests being just a bit more narratively driven. Though, to be fair, the reward for the majority of them is just clothes. I mean, at least though, these do provide some pretty unique animations for them, which is neat. And again, some of them give some loot in the form of like quirky relics, which are only equipable by the main character, but do have some interesting stat setups for them. I might have just spent a while griping and all, but I will totally say that the audio in Vambrace is just great to listen to. Like, it was definitely a highlight of the experience for me, and they really do stand out as one of the things I'll be looking forward to as I tentatively poke at a second playthrough. Oh, and, you know, in the visual department, I mean, it's also a really pretty game. Like, fundamentally, it is very pretty. Like in the art department, whether it's character portraits during conversations, the world map, or the active characters and enemies in combat, it's all really gorgeous and stylized. A bit fan servicey, to be sure. I really have to wonder about the practicality of some of those outfits in a frozen hellhole, but pretty. Oh, and the fact that all the various costumes actually come with their own portraits, including for your various moods, is super neat and made the process of acquiring the costumes that you got from completing quests actually feel a fair bit more worthwhile. Still, my earlier gripes about gameplay take precedence, and I have to say, regardless of the appealing graphics or music, and even despite my interest in the story, my thoughts on the overall gameplay in Vambrace lean more towards it just being a mediocre playing experience. At the end of the day, it felt very tedious for me to make my way through, with the countless trap activations and the consecutive maps making me wish things were over, so I could get back to the story. The improvement to the combat in the most recent patch was a step in the right direction, but the fact of the matter is that the basic kits of the characters still feel very limited, and the basic gameplay rotation is grindy. Admittedly, this is a large part of why I've dragged my heels about playing the game a second time through. Which is to say, this game is a fumble, at best, and part of the reason it's not worse is because there is a lot of potential and it wasn't quite as bad or tedious enough for me to give up on it. Mostly because I stuck around for the story. It's like, that part is honestly pretty decent, and it does set a lot of groundwork for a more expansive universe at large, and getting me invested in the game in the first place. I just really pray that if they do go the route of either DLC or a sequel, they work out a far more complex and rewarding combat system and an exploration system as the whole. Anywho, thanks for tuning in. If you agree, disagree, or just have something to say, feel free to comment. And for those interested in more indie reviews, developer interviews, podcasts, or Hamundry TTRPG content, hit the subscribe button and the bell so you know when there's a new release. There's also a Discord. Click the link in the banner or the description so you can become a part of our community, the Crit Hit Cauldron. Lastly, if you'd like to help support the channel, we have a coffee running now to help supplement funds for our lovely editors and make sure we can continue to provide quality content. Again, check the description plus the banner for them links. Anywho, I'll catch you on the next episode of Crit Hit. Take care till then, folks.